So, as for the farmhouse in the plot, we're going to see our heroine Barbara, who has just,
Well, if you can call it that.
well, she is for the time being. She's going to flee to the farmhouse, going to discover a decaying human body.
Yes, very convincing prop actually, given the budget.
Yes,
Even if we only see it for one shot.
yes, it's very nice prop and kind of just, it's very creepy and it kind of comes out of nowhere at you.
Well, that's just the question. If some zombie had gone in and devoured this poor guy, did they just wander out again?
You'd have to
How
think
long ago
so.
did this happen anyway?
Like why is the corpse there? Is one of the more major questions, I suppose. But at this point, we are basically going to be introduced to the true hero of the story in Night of the Living Dead, which is a man simply known as Ben.
Good old Ben.
Yes, Ben being one of the most badass characters in film, and
Yes.
he is going to basically be the only sane man in this
Yes,
situation.
he's kind of the audience's the person that people will relate to the most. He's the guy who's pretty much the most sensible, the most hands-on. The guy who's always trying to figure out a new plan of how to best survive this.
And this is another thing too. We are going to see in this
Yeah.
film later the '60s style nuclear family, and we are not going to. And most people in the audience are not going to get along with this family. Again, their motivations are going to be more with Ben, who is seemingly just a single man. So perhaps this is defiance.
We got the father character, his wife, and their daughter, who you later find out has been bitten by one of the undead and just slowly.
Which again, in modern times, her being bitten is like a huge oh shit moment.
And people who know anything about zombies nowadays, when they see the film, it's kind of when they figure out, even before it said that she was bitten, it becomes blatantly obvious to anyone who's in the know about what zombies are could definitely see this coming.
But in like the '60s when this first came out, there was like some true horror behind. Well, what happens when someone gets bitten?
Yeah,
It's only implied in the film up until that point that someone will become a zombie because he said because Ben himself says who knows what kinds of diseases those things have. Um, and of course it's terrible, but that gets us to another point.
yes, there's much more of a focal point in the sequels, especially Dawn of the Dead.
Mhm. Now, uh, we've got to get to a big point to this film, and it's not something that really you judge the merit of the film off of. First off, the performances in the film are surprisingly good for something made with its budget. Um, uh,
Especially the character of Ben, whose actor is pretty much how it gives the standout performance of this film.
Indeed, Ben being played by an English professor who certainly knew his way around an acting role and was himself a patron of the arts. So it's very interesting with this, and what we can't get around is the historical significance of Ben as a character. Ben is the first true African American protagonist in really a motion picture, in an American motion picture. Um, and what we mean by this, of course, is he is the main character. He's no one's lackey or anything like that. Ben is definitely the main character in this film, and he's the one that is portrayed the most positively. Now, Romero himself stated Ben was not, the role of Ben was not necessarily going to be an African American role. And this is shown through the dialogue, of course, in that no one ever once makes reference to the fact that he is black, though.
No.
So basically, uh, despite that in that time period, racism was still quite prevalent. So what we're seeing here is a very important step, but really what it links to is just what it links to is just the fact that uh, Ben had a really good actor, and this was a just a very fortunate role. It's really a coincidence that he just happened to be the best actor that applied for the role. But in the end, it ends up having a lot more implications that a lot of people read into.
And another thing that has to be said about the film is its ever-changing tone. Well, it was considered a dark film, to be sure. It starts off somewhat more optimistic, with you thinking that perhaps the plan they're cooking up to survive and perhaps get away using the truck and the gas would and the gas pump to fill it would actually work, and it's actually rooting for the characters up to the point where, well, spoiler alert, the truck blows up and two of the protagonists meet a pretty bad end.
And this is another terrific aspect of the film. Just so people know, I really don't have much bad to say about Night of the Living Dead at all. The pacing of the film, I actually feel, is quite tight. Some people might feel that it drags on too much at points, but I think that it's practically like perfect pacing. And also it's got those perfect high moments, followed by those really sinking moments.
Which pretty much happened at the last third of the film, where things start to really fall apart. Two of
Mm-hmm.
the characters are dead. The zombies are now being worn, ties to break through. The barricades are falling down, and the characters are turning on each other.
Mm-hmm. And that's another thing. Like another issue that this film addresses is the fact that humans in a crisis situation often will not actually band together, and like will often throw each other to the wolves, as
Yeah,
the father, I believe that his name's Harry, right?
yeah.
Actually tries to do.
At one point he tries to th- genuinely threatens to shoot Ben, and probably would have done it, but in the end, Ben wrestles the gun away from him, and the father is the one that ends up getting shot. And in a very intense sequence, he slowly dying from his gunshot wound, crawls down to the basement and dies at his daughter's feet, only for her to, well, as you know, reanimate and start eating his now dead remains.
Which again is like a terrific scene that again a lot of people take it as a metaphor about the nuclear family and its eventual disintegration. Um,
Destruction.
so yeah, the thematically, like I'm going to say that from a technical aspect, I found the film very impressive. Really, I feel like the modern audience may not care for it as much, due to it not nearly being as shocking of a film as it was back in the day, and maybe people having some pacing issues. I can see that, but uh, I still feel like it's a really strong film, just from a
Yeah.
technical standpoint.
Now we're not going to give away the ending if you for
We've
anyone
already spoiled so much of
so
it.
much of it, but we're keeping that one.
Okay, so we won't go through the ending then, because the ending is really important, and it's
It's one of the most gut wrenching endings in horror cinema, or maybe even film in general.
yeah. So, and it's interesting here. Um, this is another departure from traditional horror in this film, where beforehand, most of the time in horror movies, except for obviously the like Last Man on Earth, which this film takes heavy inspiration from.
Yes, and it's of course the source novel I Am Legend.
Mm-hmm. And it's in the original I Am Legend, which it does take a lot of inspiration from. But before this time, um, most horror was isolated. You had monsters that generally lurked in the far reaches of the earth, so people shouldn't go exploring because that's what they'll find.
Yes,
Here,
or monsters that are created through some sort of scientific mishap by scientists who dare to play in God's domain.
mhm,
Here, no explanation is truly given. There are possibilities, but it's never clear cut.
and the monsters are breaking down your door. You don't have to search for them because they're already here.
Yeah, you don't know where they came from, but that doesn't matter because they're here and they're coming for you.
Mm-hmm. So I think from a technical aspect, we've gone over that the soundtrack works surprisingly well. Um, I felt that, technically speaking, was very well done. You specifically stated that the special effects were pretty good for the budget. Um, and in the end, the acting is rather ably performed. Uh,
Yeah, and the dour tone, and especially near the end, predicts a very pessimistic outlook that is there throughout the film, and will be reflective of pretty much the mood of a lot of higher concept films in cinema in the coming decade, the 1970s.
yeah, and it's another one of those films that makes you question, like, in the end, was it a victory? And if it was a victory, is it really a permanent one, or is it merely temporary? Because this film does actually end up saying a lot about society as a whole.
Yeah, you don't know, well, if mankind can be go to such levels when faced with a threat like this, is it really worth saving?
That's so true. And this is where we get into the themes of the story, which we've touched upon a little bit. We've mentioned, of course, that a lot of the one of the themes is, of course, humanity's inability to cooperate. Um,
Their lack of unity, which is one of the major points of the film.
and we see that consistently where there's the argument about whether to stay on, like, the ground floor, or whether to go to the basement. Um, and Ben rather rightfully asserts that if the creatures get in, the basement is a death trap. Uh, but
And is it becoming a death trap in a rather different sense of the word at the end near the end of the film, doesn't it?
mhm. But even then, it's like it shows mistrust, and I believe that that has to do. It's another criticism of the nuclear family. We notice how the father in this story, he continues, or in Night of the Living Dead, he continues to try to be the head of the situation, and you can see him be incredibly distrustful of outsiders, um, as though the man is unquestionable, and no outside force should be able to determine what he does. And in the end, this is his downfall, that he refuses to accept anyone else's rules. And this, again, does lead to a problem. And you said something about how there's, like, a metaphor for, like, the sacrifice of the youth.
Well, yes, and the two characters of the young man and his girlfriend who help Ben with their doomed attempt at using the truck to escape, and how they are pretty much destroyed the attempt, and how really the means is that there are parallels towards them due to incooperation and not everyone helping them when they needed it. Pretty much dooms them for their plan from succeeding, and they pay the price for it. If perhaps if the father character had helped out more and had tried to be more proactive, they wouldn't. It wouldn't have gone so horribly wrong. And the torch and fire and the explosion, it all goes horribly wrong, and it's all because of the lack of unity.
Yeah, it's like another situation where the young people are dying for the older
Hmm.
generation's mistakes.
Yes.
And we're remembering, of course, that this is a Vietnam War era film.
Yeah. Very fresh in everyone's memory. And how the character of Ben is then nearly killed when the father figure doesn't refuses to open the door for him, instead locks him out, and and he would have died if he hadn't been able to get in all by himself. And it just goes to show that, well, indeed, from push comes to shove, this guy is going to sacrifice whoever he can to protect his own interests and that of his own family, and that you're not, you don't mean that much to him.
Hmm. And then we, of course, get to the biggest metaphor in the film, supposedly. And this is a metaphor that will be much more clearly stated 10 years later in Dawn of the Dead, when it finally hits the screen. And this is zombies as a metaphor for capitalism. Now, we see that you have young people, old people, children, all of these people in this film uh, are in danger and are succumbing to the zombies. And many people have interpreted the film to mean that the zombies are like capitalism. Capitalism literally devouring people, and kind of destroying people's lives.
And like you said before, this could also mean that zombies could represent the Vietnam War. That to the young people die as they are try to fight this conflict that perhaps the war started and some never came back.
And noting how in the film, Harry refuses to. He basically wants to sacrifice everyone else before himself, or at least before he even sacrifices his values, which kind of lends a bit more credence to the Vietnam War comparison.
Well, most definitely.
It's as though it's another thing where it's like the old man in government is like sacrificing other people's lives, and yeah, it's basically the idea of zombies as representing capitalism is this belief that they're devouring everything, but when we need to unite the most, we will be the most divided.
But yeah, it's this thing that conflict, a common enemy, won't bring us together. That we're just too confrontational for that even that to happen, and you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's like the greatest fear of the human race, and it's one that's revisited countless times in the zombie genre, is that this common enemy will only divide us further. And again, yeah, this is so I think that about does it for the morals. But again, this film is the genesis of the zombie genre. And if there is any trope that you notice in zombie films, you can basically bet that it started here.
Or at least it was heavily inspired by that, and it got a start in a film that was heavily inspired by it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, even the concepts now, people boarding up the windows.
Yeah. I mean, there are a few differences in what you might consider a modern zombie and the ones in Romero for first film. For one, they can use simple tools.
Yes.
There are several scenes in which zombies use various very simplistic items to help them, like the first zombie beginning smashing a window with a rock, or other zombie using wooden legs or other pieces.
Or a trowel.
Oh yes, the trowel.
Yes. So yeah, that's so true that they do use tools. Beyond that, this is the classic zombie that we don't see much of, and the reason why it's a classic zombie is, of course, because Romero invented it.
Yeah.
It's the shambling.
There were no rules back then. No more how-to guide of how to make your zombie in your zombie movie.
Yeah, it's kind of the slow, shambling zombie. And this actually leads me into my tirade about the issue I had with the film World War Z, not the excellent book by Max Brooks. World War Z and a lot of other films like it do not have an impending sense of doom, so much to say.
No, they're very much too fast-paced and want to be straight action. They have no sense of trying to build up suspense or trying to be a thriller. In the sense of the impending doom that a horde of flesh-eating zombies usually you think would bring.
And this is the strength of Night of the Living Dead, and that is carried on later in like Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. A lot of the scariest scenes in those films are the ones where the zombies aren't even there, because you know that they are in the background. They're ever present, and you are just worrying about what they're going to do when they actually do show up.
It's like a rising tide or some sort of natural disaster or a disease, an infection that you know is out there and is gradually getting closer and closer, but you don't know when it's going to hit.
It's like in World War Z when I see all these zombies like ant piling over a wall, like dog piling over a wall. That's not really all that scary because I know that they're there and that they're constantly trying to get in. With Romero's zombies and the way he does things, they can be absent for long periods of time, but when they do show up, you know that things are going to get scary.
Yep. And that is definitely true. And of course, I have to admire a lot of the ingenuity that went into making this, because the people who wrote this, Romero and the other screenwriters, must have had a lot of creativity and a lot of great ideas when coming up with this film, because it is so very imaginative.
Uh-huh. It is, and a lot of those ideas we see get passed on. I mean, like, you have to shoot them in the head. That was an idea that originates with Romero, and it is the universal rule for zombies. You got to destroy the brain.
Yes, because before this, there were the zombies that you saw in films prior to Night of the Living Dead, particularly ones that had to do with voodoo, and that they were the undead that were raised by voodoo priests to commit murder and other evil acts due to mystical means, and were essentially undead slaves. This this movie introduced a completely different type of zombie that would essentially grow to become the brand name definition of what you think zombie or the living dead are.
And they're far more terrifying than anything that a kind of voodoo shaman could create because they are a plague. They don't have thoughts beyond trying to eat and then inadvertently spreading their own infection across the world. And this is the vision of the zombie that we'll see
Yeah,
propagated.
it's not to say that old voodoo zombies aren't good movies to say that based on that. There's Hammer's Plague of the Zombies, there's Bela Lugosi in White Zombie, I Walk with Zombie, and other examples. But you really don't need to compare the two because they're basically different genres. And they're basically two different types of monster, if you ask me.
I'd say so as well. So in the end, since I think we've hit most of the bases here, um, Night of the Living Dead, of course, it's a classic, progenitor of the zombie genre that many people love to hate now because of how big it is, how big it has gotten. Uh,
Honestly, one of these days, the zombie film is going to go the way of the Western. It's going to get really, really big, and then everyone's going to get sick of it. It's going to go down, and it's going to go down.
Eventually,
No,
it will reanimate itself and come back again.
Yep, it's never get because like any movie genre, though may not be a lot of movies in that genre being made, it'll never truly die.
So in the end, what would you maybe not even like a straight up rating, but what are your closing thoughts?
Well, it's a nearly perfect film. With a bigger budget, it of course could have been better, but the fact is, I base films mostly on the story and the characters, and it excels in those areas, which completely make up for the low budget. But I understand there'll be people out there who just can't stand films that are black and white or have a low budget. Well, they're missing out because this is one of the premier best that horror films has to offer, in my opinion. And I'll watch it, and I'll continue to watch it every time Halloween comes around. No doubt about it.
Being the very big zombie fan that I am, I would say that Night of the Living Dead, probably along with Dawn of the Dead, just has to be my favorite horror film of all time. And it'll never get old for
Dawn
me.
of the Dead is slightly better in my opinion, but but of course I love both films. In fact, I love all three of Raimi's original zombie trilogy, and we'll be getting into more of the other two later.
We need to watch The Evil Dead because we keep bringing up like Raimi by accident.
Oh, gee.
It's yeah.
Wow, I am just.
We're gonna be watching The Evil Dead soon.
We're doing a lot of stuff this season, but
Mhm.
Romero, excellent when it comes to the zombie genre because, like I said before, his contributions cannot be overstated. These are great movies, great zombie movies, great horror movies. I love them, and gonna watch them anytime I get the chance.
And I think we'll leave it at that. In all honesty, if you're going to watch Night of the Living Dead, just go out and watch it. You can get it for free on the internet because of the fact that there is no copyright
Yeah,
claim on it.
there are literally hundreds of different versions of that movie, different releases of Romero's Night of the Living Dead out there on VHS, DVD, online, Blu-ray. Basically, what you can, whatever you, any way under the sun, you can watch it.
So, yeah, basically, go watch Night of the Living Dead, and you will see us in our next video where we will be tackling the 10 years later sequel that is George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Because when there is no more room left
In
in
hell,
hell,
the dead shall walk the earth.
it just took them a little while longer.
See you next time.